There we go. We're live on Facebook. Give people just a minute to tune in, check those notifications, pull up the Alpha News Facebook page. Looks like we've got some viewers. Good evening. Welcome back to the Kyle Hooten Tonight Show, hosted by Alpha News. I'm your host, Kyle Hooten, and tonight we are joined by Gordon Chang, a published author many times over and a scholar of U.S.-China political relations. You can follow him on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Mr. Chang, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Kyle.
It's been a busy couple of weeks in the topic of U.S.-China foreign relations as Biden has assumed leadership of the country, and the situation with China seems to be escalating. We have a whole gambit of topics to talk about, but starting off, I want to address the Philippines. Just today, we read in, I think it was Newsweek, that there's been a new series of incursions into the Filipino exclusive economic zone by Chinese vessels. Tell us about that and sort of explain the situation there.
Yeah, this is at Hooten Reef, which is in the Spratly chain in the southern portion of the South China Sea. This is very close to the Philippines, very far from China, but it's inside China's 9-dash line. Those are the 9 dashes on official maps. And China's a little bit ambiguous about its claims, but what it says is that every feature inside that cow's tongue, which is defined by those lines, is sovereign Chinese territory. And Beijing seems to be taking the position that even the waters themselves are sovereign Chinese waters. They call it blue national soil. What's happened at Hooten Reef is that there's about 220 Chinese vessels that have strapped themselves into formation. Looks like they're going to seize the reef from the Philippines. This is very much reminiscent of what happened in early 2012 at Scarborough Shoal. Also a Philippine feature. The Chinese seized it. And the thing that we should go back to, because Biden's in the White House, is that early 2012, you're talking about Obama. Kurt Campbell, who is now Asia czar in the Biden administration, brokered a deal between Beijing and Manila for both sides to withdraw their craft to diffuse the situation. Well, only Manila complied. It left China in control of Scarborough. And the Obama administration, not wanting confrontation, did nothing to enforce the agreement that it brokered. What China did, though, was it sensed weakness. And so therefore, just months afterwards, it started to reclaim those reefs in the Spratly chain. Those are those famous military bases. They also pressured other Philippine features, and they started to ramp up pressure in the East China Sea at the Senkaku Islands, which are administered by Japan, claimed by China. So China went out and made the problem bigger, because what we did, we Americans, we emboldened the worst elements in the Chinese political system by showing everybody else that aggression worked. Well, the same dynamic is now occurring. You've got many of the same foreign policy people in the Biden administration as in the second Obama term. And this is exceedingly dangerous, because if the Chinese are able to seize Hooten, they'll move on Taiwan, Japan, and the United States.
So is that the long-term goal here, to seize this territory in the South China Sea and then use it as a staging area for further expansionism?
Well, that's their initial goal. Chinese leaders talk about how they should rule the world. They mention Tiensya, which is this notion of China ruling all under heaven. This goes back to the imperial era, where Chinese emperors believed that they not only had the right to rule the entire world, they were compelled by the heavens to do so. And now we've got Chinese leaders recycling these Tiensya themes through their official media, through their speeches, through their propaganda releases. So, this is not just the Philippines, not just Taiwan. They talk about colonizing the United States. In other words, they believe that we're not a democratic, or shouldn't be considered a democratic republic. We should be a colony of China.
This is a very foreign narrative to a lot of casual news viewers, and honestly myself as well. There's not a lot of traction in the media about this Tiensya idea that China wants to colonize the entire world. Why do you think that is? Why isn't this more fluidly discussed?
Well, because it seems absurd to Americans, seems impossible. So we Americans are very good at dismissing what our enemies say about us. And Kyle, it gets worse, because the Chinese are not just satisfied with ruling planet Earth. We have heard Chinese space officials talk about how the moon and Mars should be sovereign Chinese territory. Now, I know that this sounds utterly ridiculous, but we can't ignore it just because we think that this is stupid. This is what these people are saying. And we've got to recognize that they are the most ambitious aggressors in history.
And their empires lasted for, I don't know how long, a very long time. They're clearly used to playing the long game. So thinking about space colonization, that falls into their timeline very nicely because they seem to have a longer event horizon than we do, if I'm understanding that properly.
Yeah, in one sense, they do have a very long event horizon. In another sense, though, it's a short one. And the reason is they believe that they are going to dominate the world, that the United States is in terminal decline. No one can stop it. Now, if you believe that, what you should do is just be nice, let historical trends take over, and eventually end up taking over the world for free without conflict. Everyone will agree with you. But that's not what China's doing right now. Xi Jinping is moving very fast. And I believe for various reasons, and this is a long conversation, but for various reasons, they are now taking a very short time frame and acting on it.
So that seems to indicate that they might not have quite full faith in their idea that America is in a natural state of decline, correct?
Yeah, and there's a couple things going on here. I think China is seeing a closing window of opportunity. It's got a lot of problems. It's got a stagnant economy. It has an eroding environment. The demography is collapsing, and it's in the initial stages of collapse. China, just for example, China this century is going to go through the sharpest demographic decline in history in the absence of war or disease. China is about 1.4 billion people now. Probably it's going to be no more than 480 million, maybe 450 million by the turn of the century. China, which is now more than 4 times more populous than the United States, could end up being less populous than the United States in 2100. So that shows you that they've got a closing window of opportunity. Now, there's a number of other factors, including Xi Jinping is just an aggressive guy. I mean, he's just off the charts aggressive. You put all this stuff together and you have a China that is moving very, very fast. It's going to take us by surprise because, we think of China as being dominant or having the world's largest economy or whatever. We talk about 2030, 2040, 2050. No, these guys believe that they've got to act now.
So is that why we're seeing them make these alliances like the one they recently brokered with Iran?
That could very well be part of it. I mean, they want to take over Iran as well. And Iran's very useful to them because the Iranians extend Chinese influence in the Middle East. That certainly undercuts Saudi Arabia, which is an American ally, but it also undercuts Russia, which is a Chinese competitor. And Iran, as a troublemaker, will bedevil the United States. And Iran that can nuke New York or San Francisco is going to be considered a strategic advantage in Beijing, just as North Korea. Because North Korea right now, if it wanted to, the only reason why New York exists now is because Kim Jong-un probably doesn't want to destroy it. But if he wakes up one morning and says, I want to kill 7 million people in New York, well, he may be able to do that.
How should we understand these relationships that China has with places like Iran and North Korea? Are they strategic partnerships based on shared interests, or is China just sort of holding them like pit bulls on a chain and using them as threats to the rest of the world?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, China sees them as its proxies so that they can destabilize the West and the international community for free. China can say it's not me. Also, China sees them as strategic advantage because we Americans fall for this all the time. George W. Bush did, Obama did to a lesser extent, and Biden is falling for it now. And that is, we go to Beijing, we ask them for help with North Korea, and we plead with them for help on North Korea. And the Chinese say, oh, of course we'll help you with North Korea, but we want concessions on other things. And one thing is, I didn't like Trump North Korea policy. But the one really good thing about it, or there's two good things about it. One of them was that he was prying North Korea away from China. The other was he wasn't playing China's game on North Korea. So unfortunately, we've heard Secretary of State Blinken in public ask the Chinese for help on North Korea. That is not a good sign.
No, not at all. It seems sort of counterintuitive that you would ask China to bend one of their allies to our objectives. It's very counterintuitive. But speaking of sort of the Biden administration's approaches to China, what are your thoughts there? I've seen conflicting reports. Some people say that China smells blood in the water. Other people contest that. What's your take?
Well, they do smell blood in the water. This is a fact. We've heard elite members of the Beijing community talk about how they own President Biden. And they talk about Hunter Biden. They talk about the link through Wall Street, that they can determine outcomes at the highest level of the political system. I'm not saying they're right, but I am saying that's what they're thinking. And that makes them extremely dangerous because that means they think that they can do what they want, which means they're going to push us too far, which means that we could end up in conflict at any time. So the issue here is not the accuracy of their assessments of the United States. What's the issue here is just what they're thinking. This is just dangerous.
Right. Even if the threats aren't 100% true, even if there's an element of bluffing there, the fact that they're willing to say it is startling to begin with. You mentioned the possibility for conflict. Do you mean an armed confrontation, an economic confrontation, a trade war?
Well, China's been waging a trade war against the US for decades. Of course, there's economic conflict. They're stealing hundreds of billions of dollars of US intellectual property every year. But we can't rule anything off the table, Kyle, because there could very well be military conflict with China. And it's probably not going to stay conventional. If we end up in a war with China, which is very possible, not because we want it, but because China does something that forces us to defend ourselves, we can't rule anything out. This could be history's last war.
Yeah, that's a good point. And sort of the next logical step in the conversation is Taiwan. I've got two articles pulled up on my screen here. One from the Financial Times that reads, China's maneuvers near Taiwan fuel concerns of a potential attack. And then another one from the World Politics Review that says, quote, fears of an imminent Chinese invasion of Taiwan are overblown. So again, you've got both sides in the media. What's your take on the Taiwan situation? Is it brinksmanship or should we be legitimately concerned?
Well, there are a number of voices in Beijing who are saying that Taiwan must be annexed within 5 years. And we heard Admiral Phil Davidson, the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, talk about a 6-year time frame. He's stepping down soon. His successor says 5 years. So we're talking very soon. Now, I'm prepared to admit that China is just bluffing. I don't know. Only they really know whether they're bluffing or not. But even if they are bluffing, we know from history that nations and regimes that threaten war usually end up starting them, not because they want to, but because they create situations that end up in. And just to give you one example, today's April 1st. Today is the 20th anniversary that an aggressive Chinese fighter pilot clipped the aileron of the EP-3, an unarmed U.S. Navy reconnaissance vessel over the South China Sea, forced our plane down, which ended up landing in Hainan Island. They held the crew for about 11 days or so. They stripped the plane. We were very fortunate that the naval aviator at the controls was able to land that plane. If he hadn't been able to do it, we would have suffered something like 24 casualties, 24 killed in action. Mm-hmm. And who knows what would have happened after that. So China is continuing these dangerous intercepts of the US Navy and the US Air Force. They're dangerous intercepts with Taiwan, Japan, all the rest of it. One of these situations could go terribly wrong. And the law of averages says that one of them will.
You're painting a picture of some pretty short fuses here. And I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying it feels almost surreal that China would be willing to push it that far to the point where, you're one mess up away from having casualties that could lead to war. Why are they riding that line so close?
Well, because they think they can. I mean, they think they think Biden's a pushover, so they feel they can do whatever they want. And to go to your other point about how this is surreal, the day before Archduke Ferdinand was assassinated,
Mhm.
No one thought there was going to be war. And
That's a
what
good
we end
point.
up with the first global conflict. You get World War I, and shortly thereafter, you get World War II. And these things just not predictable in a sense of when they happen. But clearly, China is engaging in actions that are creating situations that anything is possible. And that's why we've got to be concerned. That's why, to use your word, this is surreal. But just because it's surreal doesn't mean it's not real.
Absolutely. It just means that it doesn't feel real. We're not willing to perceive it to be as dire as it is. Turning back to the US for a minute, what do you make of our military readiness? What do you make of our political readiness to engage in these conflicts? Do you have any criticisms or praise of how we handle China during these tense moments?
Yeah, we are so unprepared. First of all, just on a military point of view, we don't have the assets in the region that would assure victory. And I'm not, there's been a lot made of these Pentagon war games where the Chinese cream the U.S. Air Force, cream the Navy. Yeah, probably they can do that, but we can still deter them, because even if they think they can take Taiwan, they're not going to do it if they think they're going to suffer horrendous casualties. And the reason is that the number one priority of Chinese foreign policy is not to take Taiwan. The number one priority of Chinese foreign policy is to maintain the rule of the Communist Party. And I think the party believes that they cannot stay in power if they suffer hundreds of thousands or millions or tens of millions of casualties. But be that it is, we're just not in a position to assure victory. And then, of course, you've got a society right now that is sharply divided. You've got a Beijing, which is stoking racial antagonism in the United States. You got a Biden administration that's playing into that, propagating Communist Party narratives. I'm very concerned. And that's why, Beijing thinks that it can do what it wants, because to a certain extent, they look at Biden, and Biden's been doing what they want, and he's not asking anything in return from these guys. So, of course, they look at him and say, he's a patsy. As I said, I'm not going to say that he's a patsy, but I'm going to say it doesn't matter whether he is or not. What matters is the Chinese think he's a patsy.
Absolutely. And they're saying it. And, I've heard you say this many times. We have to listen to what our enemies say about us, because they're expressing what they believe. One thing you mentioned there, and I've heard you mention it before, and I just want to focus in on it a little bit for our audience, is China's role in stoking racial animosity inside America. Could you describe for us exactly how they're doing that and what the impacts of Chinese meddling on American society are?
Well, there's a steady stream of propaganda releases about saying how racist America is. And what they're doing is they are then saying that criticism of China is stoking hatred of Asian Americans. So legitimate discussion of China is hate speech. And that, of course, I'm a Chinese American. And what that's doing is it's encouraging Chinese Americans to do something they've done in the past, which is, to my mind, unacceptable. I mean, you get a lot of Chinese Americans who are obviously openly more loyal to Beijing than to the United States. And in my mind, they're subject to criticism, legitimate criticism. And I believe that they should be held to account for that. Well, Beijing is encouraging Asian Americans and Chinese Americans to support Beijing. And that, of course, is causing racial antagonism. But the other thing is, and this is at the same time, China takes the narrative that US policies in Asia, and this comes from a recent propaganda release of about a week and a half ago, that America's policies in Asia are all, quote unquote, white supremacy. And Beijing is now promoting the line, not that China is rising, but that the East is rising. And this brings us back to something the Japanese did in the 1930s. They tried to unite Asia on racial lines. Well, China's trying to do the same thing right now. That was the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere of the Japanese Empire. It didn't work then. I don't think it's going to work now, but it's going to leave a lot of divisions in societies. You know, our allies in Asia are darker skin tones, and China is trying to play that racial divide.
Very interesting. Is China pretty hegemonous internally? Like, is there any dissent to that idea of sort of a pan-Asian racial unity, or is this something that they're pretty lockstep on from what we can tell?
I don't think the Chinese people really think about this. The Communist Party thinks a lot about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that if you, and we don't really know what the Chinese people think on sensitive issues, but my guess is that if you were to ask them, is it a good idea to do what the Japanese did in the 1930s? You'd get a hell no.
Right.
For a lot of reasons. But, you know, the Chinese people, they're repressed. They don't speak out because they feel that there's no advantage in that. They feel that they would be imprisoned as they would. So they don't say anything. They just try to avoid politics by and large.
That makes a lot of sense. If you're living under such a terrifying regime, I might also take the same approach. The liberty we have here to come on a web show and discuss politics really cannot be taken for granted. It's incredible.
That's right. It cannot be taken for granted.
Yeah, it's really astounding. I want to pivot now a little bit. I read a report today in, I think it was also Reuters, that China is now the world's biggest creditor, and they're giving a lot of these loans to developing countries. First of all, what do you make of the purpose of these loans? Are they trying to colonize and extract resources? Are they trying to develop allies? And I've got a follow-up question after that, but let's start with that for now. What do you make of the purpose of the loans?
Yeah, I think it's more the former than the latter, though, of course, they would like allies. But for instance, I mean, they want to support somebody, for instance, the Venezuelan regime. So they've got tens of billions of dollars in outstanding debt there, which at one time was actually a lot more. But they want to be able to control that regime, especially because it bedevils the United States. They've got this Belt and Road initiative to really build the infrastructure out. And we have learned, especially in the last 3 or 4 days, that the terms of these loans on the debtors are onerous. China wants to control them. And so a lot of these loans are at high interest rates. They've gone belly up on many of these countries can't pay them back. And so this is a situation where China tries to use that as leverage to obtain geopolitical goals.
So do those loans and their fragility have any impact on the global financial system, or is it just something that's used to control those countries?
It doesn't have an impact on the global financial system now because China is the creditor. So it has an impact on China, but not on the global financial system.
That's good. I suppose there's some silver lining there. But speaking of global finance, something we've been hearing a lot about over the last couple of weeks is copper. China is, as you know, and our viewers probably know, doing a lot of modernization efforts. They're doing a lot of heavy infrastructure building, and it's driven the price of copper up significantly. Biden has also unveiled a similar infrastructure project that will require similar amounts of copper. What are your predictions there? Do you think this is going to be two ships passing in the night, or could it be another nexus for conflict?
Well, I think that China is going to try to take advantage of that because we're going to need copper to build stuff if Biden's plan passes Congress. So China's going to benefit from Biden's infrastructure plan and through a number of different ways. But one of them is, of course, that they're going to be selling commodities. China wants to build American infrastructure to build out Biden's plan. They actually said that today. And you can't make this stuff up.
The amount that they just say things, they just broadcast their plans, and we don't listen to them is astonishing. I don't mean to.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's another the topic about how dumb Americans are, but we'll save that for a later day.
Absolutely. So China, from what I understand, actually owns the copper and is going to have to sell it back to us. Is that correct?
Something like that. I mean,
Okay.
we're going to have to get the copper someplace. Now, they're not the only copper suppliers in the world, but certainly they're going to take advantage of further substantial increases in prices.
Gotcha, gotcha. You mentioned that there's other ways they could benefit from Biden's proposed infrastructure plan. What are those?
Well, since you asked, I mean, just a couple things. U.S. manufacturing has one big advantage, and that is very cheap energy.
Yep.
Now, Biden plans to move away from fossil fuels to green energy. That's going to be very expensive. This is going to really hurt U.S. manufacturing. So we're going to see this. And also tax increases. It's going to kill the American economy. China just loves this. And I hope that people in the United States start to understand that China would be the biggest beneficiary of this, because it would just undermine the U.S. economy in so many different ways.
That makes a lot of sense. I know we're kind of coming down on our time here, but I've got one question. It's not super relevant, but I've been wanting to ask a China expert for a long time. What's the deal with the Three Gorges Dam situation? Because it feels like every 6 months, there's some story about how the dam is distressed and it's going to collapse, and then it goes away. Is it just a media sensation, or is there some legs to it?
Well, the Three Gorges Dam has created some environmental problems that China can't deal with. I mean, the stories you referred to, like cracking in the dam, I mean, how serious is it? And we really don't know. It's one of those things that it's fine until it isn't. It's probably going to be okay. But the Three Gorges Dam creates a number of of environmental problems that China has no answer to. So, for instance, you've got a lot of silting. You've got a lot of that reservoir, which is, I think, the world's largest, is heating up the environment there. These are things which people knew about when China was thinking of actually going forward with this dam, but decided to just ignore for various reasons. But right now, this is becoming, it's contributing to an environmental disaster that Beijing has no answer to. Now, they can get by day because it's not catastrophic. But at one point, we're going to find out that, something really bad happens. And I'm not talking about a collapse of the dam itself. It's just that this, in addition to other water problems China has, I think are going to create problems that they can't deal with in Beijing.
Absolutely. You said something there. You said it's fine until it's not. And I feel like that's been sort of the theme of this entire interview. There's this anvil hanging over all of our heads, and the enemy is screaming about it, telling us about the anvil. And it seems like many of us have yet to look up and notice that things are fine until they're not. And we appreciate you coming on and highlighting that for us tonight.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Fantastic interview. Always a pleasure. Hope to see you again soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.